Queensland has now produced a landmark report that shows 20 years of satellite monitoring of tree clearing. If you look at the average, 91% of all tree clearing has been clearing for livestock.
Greetings, eco-conscious viewers, and welcome to Planet Earth, our loving home. On this week's program, Australian scientists Gerard Bishop and Dr. Clive McAlpine will discuss the severe environmental damage inflicted by livestock raising on our world, most notably deforestation and climate change. Mr. Bishop recently retired from a position as a remote sensing scientist with the statewide Land Cover and Tree Study, or SLATS group, mapping vegetation cover and tree clearing rates across the state of Queensland, Australia. The group has published a landmark report tracing 20 years of deforestation in Queensland. In addition to his work on the SLATS report, Mr. Bishop recently co-wrote a paper on the extremely harmful environmental and climatic effects of livestock grazing. The study will be presented at the biennial conference of the Australian Association of Environmental Education in September 2010.
What we looked at was the common cause for land degradation, soil loss, biodiversity loss, that is trees and plants and animals being extinct, and loss of forests, that is deforestation. The common cause, in fact causing 91% of that, is land clearing for raising livestock.
Dr. McAlpine, an Associate Professor in the School of Geography, Planning and Environmental Management at the University of Queensland, Australia, is lead author of a paper that concludes that beef consumption is the cause of serious environmental injury to the planet and a driver of climate change. The study was published last year in the interdisciplinary journal Global Environmental Change, Human and Policy Dimensions.
I've been researching here since 1998 on various issues relating to environmental change, especially land clearing and its impacts on biodiversity and climate in Australia. I have three main research interests. The first is the conservation of biodiversity in human modified landscapes, agricultural areas in particular, but also in urban regions. I've done a lot of work on koala conservation and also other mammal species, gliders, kangaroos, and more recently on birds and reptiles. My other main area of research is the effects of land cover change or land use change related to deforestation in particular on climate in Australia and globally, and how that applies to climate policy.
According to research conducted by Dr. Clive McAlpine, Gerard Bishop and their colleagues, livestock grazing is the main cause of deforestation in Australia and an array of other environmentally devastating phenomena.
For the past 16 years, my group's been involved in mapping and monitoring the tree clearing. This has involved field trips to ascertain on the ground what's happening, as well as examining the satellite imagery. Satellite imagery tells us there has been a change in the vegetation, but we need to test it on the ground to see what exactly that change has been. And they attribute that to either livestock grazing or to mining, urban expansion, forestry activities, and other agriculture like crops. But in that 20-year report, 91%, fully 91% of that tree clearing was for grazing animals. Sometimes they're tree clearing where they use two large bulldozers pulling a chain between them, and they just clear the trees, pull the trees over and leave them laying on the ground. or they might use bulldozers to rake them in, burn them in a pile, or they might inject the trees with poison. They call that stem injection to kill the trees, or they might use aerial poison to poison the trees from an aircraft. All of these kill the trees so that grass can grow to feed the livestock.
As Dr. McAlpine explains, tree clearing has had an enormously negative impact on biodiversity.
When you look at landscapes like in Western Australia, southwest Western Australia, New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland, that amounts to some areas having less than 10% or even 5% native vegetation remaining. So there's very extensive clearing in those areas, and that's had major impacts for biodiversity and also for catchment hydrology and for feedbacks on climate. The other changes in the other parts of Australia are not as obvious, but there's also some quite significant changes in terms of grazing impacts on ecosystems and land degradation that don't involve direct clearing of the land, but do change ecosystems and biodiversity in the process that occur there. So those two combined have had a very significant impact on Australia's environment. The major decline in species in Australia has been in Australia's mammals, where there's approximately 20 mammal species that have gone extinct since European settlement. Attributing all that to land clearing is difficult. I think there's multiple causes there. One is grazing, changes in fire regimes, introduction of exotic predators, and that's occurred in the arid zone in southwest Western Australia and in sort of western Queensland and New South Wales and into Victoria. Birds are now in serious trouble in southeast Australia through habitat loss and also more recently drought, which is starting to have an impact on resources available for birds. But there's other species like the koala, which I've done a lot of research on, and it's starting to decline quite rapidly, and especially in the urban coastal regions of Queensland and New South Wales, and there's some really serious concerns there about koalas. But even in western areas, in the western sort of rangelands where we're working, koalas are also declining, and we attribute that to land clearing and to drought and heat waves. Koalas are very sensitive to hot, sort of dry weather, and where they suffer sort of heat and moisture stress.
When we return, we'll learn more about the environmental and climatic destruction caused by tree clearing for livestock raising. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television.